Okay, it's time to commit. 2024 is the year for prioritizing yourself. Begin your new smile journey with Byte, and you could start seeing results in just 2 to 3 weeks. Just order your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95 at Byte.com. Byte clear liners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces, plus they offer financing options, accept eligible insurance, and you could pay with your HSA, FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte.
It's easy to get lost in the latest true crime podcast or your favorite binge-worthy show. But what about your own story? That's the most important story of all, and therapy helps you write it. BetterHelp Therapy is 100% online and designed to be convenient and flexible enough to squeeze in between the next episode on your list. Get started today at betterhelp.com/pause for 10% off your first month.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system. If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served. Hi, I'm Detective Dave. I'm Detective Dan. Together we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood. So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished. From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
And each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is writer, photographer, metalsmith, academic, and all-around badass, Sofia Ajram. They're editing the upcoming anthology, Bury Your Gaze, an anthology of tragic queer horror. Welcome to the show!
Thank you so much for having me, and such a sweet intro. I appreciate it.
What don't you do?
I know!
As they say, jack of all trades.
Yeah, we were scoping your website, and we're like, good lord, your resume is very long.
Stacked!
Thank you. Yeah.
One thing I did notice, though, do you like League of Legends?
I do. I am a League fan. It's been a while since I've played, but I was like hardcore into the League community when it was like on its way, I guess, to the like size of fandom that it has now. So I did a lot of League cosplays, which are on my site, which is probably what you're referring to.
Yeah, but I'm curious, do you have a favorite? What's your favorite League character?
I play Shen, who is a, I guess, utility tank, if you're...
Okay.
For those who don't know, League of Legends is like a multiplayer online game, and there's like over 150 characters that you can select.
So many.
So there's
oh my god,
something
there's that
for
many?
everyone.
Dear
That's
God.
Yeah, that's part of the reason why I kind of like fell out of it, because I was like, there's too much to keep up with. There's like patches on like a weekly or monthly basis. I was like, respectfully, I love this so much, but right now I don't have the mental capacity.
I get it. I used to play it a little bit.
Awesome.
I'm more into Smite just because I like having direct control over my character instead of like clicking to move, and I'm really bad at that. So I was horrible at League, but I did play that in Dota 2 a whole lot. And so when I saw that, I was like, ooh.
Yeah, they're similar for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that.
Okay, but more about like, I want to hear about Bury Your Gaze. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about it? Because you are accepting as of this episode recording, you're still accepting submissions, right?
I am. So the submission window is until May 31st, 2023. And Bury Your Gaze is an anthology which will feature stories of tragic queer horror, which to me specifically, I was looking for stories that were obviously specifically queer, like through a queer lens, but mostly about, I guess, like romance. And I loved all of these different stories that I was seeing in literature or in film. Like, for instance, Reanimator, which has like Herbert West and his like colleague, and it's like slightly queer coded. And I'm like, what if we just tilted it a little bit further? And I love when stuff has like a tragic ending. I'm like, give me the Romeo and Juliet. They like off themselves. I'm like, I love that. I love a deeply devastating ending. I love to just be completely, totally wrecked by a story, which is basically the inspiration for this anthology. I'm just like, I'm making something that delights me, and I'm so glad that it's delighting other people enough to want to write and submit work.
Hell yeah.
That's amazing. Are you writing anything for it?
I'm not. I am, well, that's not true. I am writing the foreword, which I've never done before. I was speaking to Max Booth, who is the publisher for this project, and I was like, how do forewords work? Because it's my first time editing an anthology. And I was like, do you pay someone for a foreword? How did the logistics behind that work? And he was like, well, I thought you were going to write it because it's your project and people want to know why you have an interest enough in this to make an anthology about it. And I was like, damn, he's right. Like,
I need to explain my rationale. Shit.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, no pressure. But yeah, it's surprisingly coming together. I mean, we're still obviously in the like open submission period right now, but the stories that I have sort of long listed have already kind of filtered down into a theme, like that I haven't.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah, I haven't selected. Like, I wasn't like conscientious when I was putting them together, but I was like, oh, there's kind of a flow that's happening, which was really nice. So
hell yeah.
I'm so excited.
Yeah, I am too. But one of the things that like I'm really enjoying right now about this new queer writing movement is making messy queer people, because I think for the longest time, like, it's always been, that show buried their gays, or, you know, that kind of stuff, particularly with lesbian characters. I'm thinking back with like a lot of TV shows and everything that has that as a trope, but it's typically written by straight people. And now that we're like getting more queer authors out there, the fact that we're seeing messy queers, evil queers, good queers, tragic stories involving queers, but written from a queer perspective, it's so, I don't know, it's really refreshing, and I'm really digging that this moment is happening right now.
Me too. I definitely, I'm so happy that this anthology gets to exist, especially just, I feel like you two will know what I'm talking about, being like chronically online, especially on Twitter. There is so much discourse constantly happening. There's obviously like nuance between like what's appropriate and what's not. I think there are times where it is appropriate to kind of like call someone out on something, but there are a lot of instances where there are queer authors who are writing queer characters and they do have messy endings, or, you know, villainous backgrounds, or just aren't necessarily these sort of like very sanitized representations. And I'm like, that's what being a human being is. That's what being queer is all about. And to not have those representations just feels like, if we're not talking about something, then it makes it shameful. And then it's like, that means that there's something wrong with it. And it's like, you're not seeing the full scope of the human existence when you're like, oh yeah, we're not going to talk about difficult or triggering topics because they might like harm a reader, where I think that these things are maybe more helpful if they do exist and we create like trigger warnings or content warnings beforehand. But yeah, it's always nuanced, but
it is. But I was just thinking about how I got into an argument with someone on Twitter, because again,
as you do,
chronically online, because they, and I'm not going to name names, but like they were angry at me for like praising Bly Manor, because I was so happy as a little queer kid that grew up reading Gothic literature to have basically a tragic story about queer people that was gothic and was everything that I grew up reading, that everything was sort of in the closet. They were, you know, they would skirt around it, or there'd be like subtext to it. But here's a queer character in a queer story that sorry listeners for spoiling, but like it ends in tragedy. And I didn't find that problematic. But then this person was like, it's bury your gays. I'm like, it was written by a queer person though. And they're like, bury your gays, bury your gays. I'm like, I think there's a little bit more nuance to it than that. So like I said, I am living for this new resurgence of like Eric LaRocca or that kind of, you know, thing where it's like dirty, mean, evil, nasty, sad, tragic, like all of that side of the human relationship, as you were kind of saying, Sophia.
Yeah, totally.
I love it.
I think I definitely agree. Also, just that like the gothic subgenre is just so queer coded to begin with. I'm like, put it out in the open. We want to see.
Yeah.
It's like barely. It's like almost the text at that point. Like if you're reading it, you're like, the subtext.
Where's the sub?
Sort of, but like maybe not.
Is it? Yeah.
But Sophia, so how did you get into horror? Like, how are you introduced to the horror genre?
I feel like this goes back to like pre-memory. My mom was always very into horror growing up. And again, this is like, I feel like I have such poor memory. Like my sense of self did not start to exist before the age of 5. So it's like the memories are barely there. But from what I can remember, she had a very close friend named Leela that she grew up with, and they would constantly do like horror movie nights. And she grew up reading Stephen King and a lot of gothic horror as well. And it was very much a household where it was like, whatever you want to rent, we can rent. Like most of the movies I was too young to go into theaters to see, so I would just get secondhand stories. So I remember her going to see Hellraiser with my brother and then describing to me, I don't think it's in the first Hellraiser, but there was like a scene where, I don't know, someone was like sucked into a bed and then there's like just a pool of blood just like shooting out of like this hole in the bed. And I was like petrified that this was going to happen to me as a kid because I hadn't actually seen the movie. So I was just like imagining in my mind the worst possible case scenario. So those kinds of things informed a lot of my love for horror. There's also in Canada, I think it works differently in the States, but in Canada, the rating system starts at 14.
Yeah.
So if you're 14 or older, you can go into like 14A films. So I remember like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like the remake had come out and I was maybe like 12. So I was like just shy of being able to go in. And my brother had like just turned 14. So he was going in with all of his friends. And I was like so salty about it that I made it a point to do like as many horror movie marathons as I could possibly get my hands on from like Blockbuster out of spite.
Hell yeah.
So
that's the way to be spiteful. Something that's enjoyable as well. Like that's exactly. The best kind of spite. Do you remember like the first horror movie that you have recollections of watching as a kid?
I feel like it's a mix. Probably Something Wicked This Way Comes was.
Oh wow! Okay.
I swear I must have been like 3 or 4. Again, like pre-memory, like so young, and just the like. I need to rewatch it. So literally, the only memories that I have of this film are from when I was a kid and I had first seen it. But the being on a merry-go-round that like ages you really quickly.
Yep.
Anything that has to do with like skewing perceptions of time really freaks me out.
Okay.
And feels very like existential
dread even as a child. As a young child.
I was like, what do you mean I'm going to age and die? I just got here.
See, meanwhile, if I had seen that as a kid, I would have been just traumatized by the tarantula scene because I was traumatized watching that as an adult.
Spiders? Yeah, in the bed. Yeah, that also just petrified me. It's basically like existential horror, like existential dread, or anything that can come and get me when I'm in bed alone by myself. Those are the criteria.
Nightmare on Elm Street movies. Great.
Exactly. Yeah. Like not like this.
Not like this.
Yeah, but like that kind of stuff, and obviously there's a bunch of films that aren't like outright genre horror films that you folks have featured, like The Mummy and stuff like that, where it's just like there's genre elements that, well, is The Mummy horror? I guess it is horror action.
I think it's like horror action, but like an emphasis on the action more than the horror.
Yeah.
But still, I would still consider that a horror movie.
Yeah.
I do too. I mean, there's literally flesh-eating scarabs that burrow under people's skin. Like,
So spooky.
that's fucking horrifying.
Just like, how did that movie is just so good and so hot. Like, they just really changed a generation of people.
Just made
with that
everyone
movie.
buy.
Yeah, pretty much. It seems like.
Really, kind of.
Anyway, just thinking about Rachel Weisz.
Yeah, I know, right? You mentioned that you kind of were allowed to rent anything and everything. So you had a very like open household in terms of watching whatever you wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
Is that nice?
Yeah. So I remember being in, or actually, this is even before. I'm like recollecting my own memories in my mind in real time.
It's such a like amorphous time. Like
Right?
trying to think back of like when I first saw a movie, and I'm like, I don't know, isn't that 3
Like, I
to
was
7
10,
range?
4, yeah.
Who knows?
But yeah, like I remember, so my family, we mostly grew up in Aurora, Ontario, which at the time was just dead middle of nowhere. Like our house number was 1, and it was just like our house, boom, plot of land with like acres of field around us, and we had like a tractor that we had to. So it was just like dead of nowhere, which that influenced a lot of like what scared me. So a lot of natural disaster stuff would scare me. So like,
Okay.
there's like that volcano movie. I forget what it's called.
Volcano or Dante's Peak? Or...
Dante's Peak.
Dante's
where
Peak.
Grandma dies in like an acid pool. Again, just like these horrifying.
Jesus.
So there's a scene in this film where they're on like a canoe or something, and they're trying to get to a location, and they're just like, oh my god, like 2 meters shy of like being at the edge of the water, but they're like, the water, because of the volcano, is just like, it's turned into acid. And then the like grandmother's like, don't worry, I'll push the boat. And she gets out and then slowly dies of acid burns so that everyone else can live. And I was like 4 or 5 when I saw this. I was like, okay.
I vaguely remember that. I've seen Dante's Peak. I've not seen Volcano, but I've seen Dante's, because they both came out around the same time. But I remember seeing Dante's Peak, but I don't remember much about it. But now that you're saying this, like, I'm having recollections of that happening. How horrifying! Because that was a PG-13 movie too. Mm-hmm. Yeah, seriously.
But yes, like natural disaster stuff like that and Twister scared me so much just because of like how mercurial weather is.
Twister? Okay, I don't think I've ever talked about this in the podcast, and like my absolute like debilitating fear of tornadoes when I was like in middle school, like late elementary school to like end of middle school, because my dad's girlfriend at the time had grown up in Ohio and decided to tell me all about what happens when there's a tornado. And because I had undiagnosed OCD and no one thought that perhaps Mary Beth might have an anxiety disorder, when every time there was a thunderstorm, I would turn on the news and have to check outside, pack all of my things and put them in the basement in case there was a tornado, because I didn't want to lose all my things. But I'd also seen Twister, and to me, tornadoes were only like absolutely devastating, destroy your entire house situation. So like between my dad's girlfriend and Twister, I was just like, and I live in Maryland. Like there was no tornadoes where I lived, none, like never. We'd have like thunderstorms, but the other problem is though we have thunderstorms all the time in the summer. So every thunderstorm I would have a panic attack, and my mom for like a year was like, I don't know what to do with you. And I'm like, you didn't think to take me to therapy? I was having panic attacks every time it rained.
You did this, Mom.
Meanwhile, we actually recorded once during a tornado warning for me.
Oh my god, you animal.
You're Mr. Midwest. You're like, fuck it, whatever.
I'm the one that's going to go out on the porch and look.
I know. Meanwhile, my dumbass on the East Coast was like, it's over. Every time there was a thunder rumble, it's over.
Pray to God. Did you ever do, there's like that ride in Universal Studios that's like the earthquake.
The Twister ride. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Oh, that also scared the shit out of me. I was like, that just
It's
added to my trauma.
Exactly. So I was over that trauma by then, but then I did that, and I was like, this might not be the best idea. Like this almost pushed me over the edge. I was like, ooh, no, was not prepared for that.
I hate this.
I hate this. But even though you had access to like whatever you wanted to watch, were you a scared kid? Like, were you easily scared by horror movies?
I feel like that's hard to gauge because I'm like, compared to who? I feel like I was. I
guess was it easy for you to lose sleep or like think about it or have nightmares? Like, were you like bothered a lot by things after you watched them? I guess
I think so. I would constantly. I had like a laundry basket full of stuffed animals, and then every night I would take them out and systematically face them in different directions in my room so they'd be sentries to like ward off whatever spooky thing was coming to get me. And then I had the child logic of like, if I can't see the monster, they can't see me. So I would just like burrito myself into like the blanket so that it was just my mouth and nose.
Oh yeah.
Out. I was like, they can't get me.
I was also that kid. I'm like, if every part of me is hidden, nothing will get me. They won't know I'm here.
Exactly. And like, I also had really bad storms, which just like fed into the whole Twister thing. And I don't know if it was because of like the system that we had set up, but in the kitchen, the oven would like beep really loudly whenever there was a storm. I guess because the power was like coming in and out.
Okay.
But it's like the most demonic sound. And the house that we lived in was like so surreal. It's one of those things where I'm like, part of me never wants to revisit that house, but then part of me wants to like, if I'm ever in the area, knock on the door and see if I can like go in and peek around, because I'm like, is my understanding of what this house looks like totally distorted through years and years of like misremembering.
Oh yeah, okay.
Because we lived in a bungalow and it was just this like, we were a family of 5, so and like at times 6 because I had like a half brother, but we had this like immense house, at least for a kid, and it was this like huge long hallway. It was a bungalow, and there was like the kitchen at one end with this like demonic oven with like a red light, just like a Howl like Space Odyssey light, just like glowering at you in the middle of the night, and then like a long hallway and all these like rooms branching off, and then my room was like at the very end.
Oh,
so wait, you could see the light from your room, just like at
no, I'd have to like peek around the corner, so like my room was like you would take like an L basically to get to my room. But if I ever got scared and I needed to like call my parents, I was like, oh no, I have to like run across the hall to get to their room. So I would just sit there paralyzed in bed, not saying anything for hours. So to answer your question, yes, I think I was very scared.
Yeah. I was going to say, you might have been, and that's okay. Because I was also a terrified kid. But are you easily scared now when you watch horror movies?
For like a really long time, I avoided anything that was sort of supernatural, like especially demonic stories. Okay. I don't know why. I was like, psychological horror for babies, I can do this. Body horror, like torture and all those things, I was like, man, we can do this. I feel like I got into a fad like a lot of people who like eventually get into horror do, where I discovered the like horror subreddit and I was like, most extreme horror. I was like, I'm going to watch all the like craziest movies. Whereas like August Underground, like Sallow, Serbian film, like Martyrs, anything that was like super over the top. I was like, I can handle this. I'm a big boy. But like Exorcism of Emily Rose, I was like, I can't do this. This will just like live in my mind. And like haunt me when I'm about to go to sleep, and that's what I can't handle, I find.
Interesting.
Okay.
Did you grow up religious at all? Like, is it like a religious trauma? Is it linked to like religious stuff at all?
I don't know. When I really think about it, well, my family grew up Catholic, so I'm like, that probably it's probably peppered in there.
That might have like a residual something to do with it. It's always the Catholic. Like me, I'm a lapsed Catholic. It's always the Catholics who are scared of the possession movies.
Well, you know, it's funny though, because like I'm not religious. I didn't grow up religious. I don't believe in ghosts or any of that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But like supernatural stories of like ghosts, like the Conjuring, Insidious, that kind of stuff. Not necessarily demonic possession stuff, but like supernatural, spooky, ooky, haunted house stuff always gets me.
Same.
Even though I don't believe in it. So it happens.
Have you ever had a ghost experience?
I mean, like, I've joked around on Twitter that I think my house is haunted, but I don't really. No, I've never really had.
All right, you also told a story recently that involved a Ouija board and knocking, and you and you never told me that until like a week ago, and I was like, I'm sorry, Mr. I don't believe in jack shit had a weird ass Ouija board experience.
Explain.
Yeah, I'm putting you on blast, bitch.
Well, it's actually going to be an episode that comes out a little bit later, but as a little tease for it,
blew it up.
My dad collects a lot of books, and when I was a kid, he had some that had potentially magic rituals in it, and I tried to do them.
How old were you? At what age?
Like middle school. Because it was out of Alaska. It was when I was living in Nebraska. So it would have been like 8th grade, 9th grade, like 13, 14, 15.
Not old enough to know better.
No.
Where the fuck around and find out age.
I still would do it now. Like if I could find those books, I would still try to do those rituals because I just think it's silly.
You're fucking. I can't with
Unhinged.
you. Absolutely. Fuck that. No, absolutely not.
Unhinged. That's the one thing my mother would never let me do. Use a Ouija board. She was like, not in my house. Like, we can watch whatever the fuck we want. You could read what you want. You could bring over whoever you want. We're not touching a Ouija board. That's where she draws the line. She's like, if you want to do meth, you can do meth, but we're not fucking bringing a Ouija board in my house.
Look. Yep. Yeah. That's parenting right there.
Quality parenting.
But so is there a recent horror movie that has really gotten under your skin and that's really scared you?
I was watching recently, it's a short film. So I do like a movie night with a friend of mine who's also a horror writer named Mitch Lopez da Silva. And they have been showing me a lot of like new to me genre films. And we watched last week a short film called La Cabina. And it's from the 70s. And it's not like outright spooky horror. It's more, it fits into the like existential absurdist subgenre.
Oh.
It's about this man who goes into a phone booth to make a phone call and the phone isn't working. And when he goes to leave, the phone booth is locked. And so he's locked inside. No one can get him out. No one can hear him, but everyone can see him. And so it's this like, it starts off as this almost like a film noir style comedy because like no one can hear him and people are trying to like smash it open or like use a crane. And there's all these like very over the top weird like fisheye lens like cinematography that's happening that just makes it seem like it's almost like clownish. And then it slowly devolves into this like horrifying nightmare where they're like, I don't want to spoil the ending, but basically they like take him away in the phone booth and then he realizes that he's like not the only one who's going through this, but there's still no way to get out. And I feel like there's no escape from whatever it is that the horror is really hits a sore spot for me of like terror.
Yeah.
So I'm on the Wikipedia page and I see that they actually did a replica of the red phone booth as a tribute to the film.
Ooh.
Close by the filming location in Madrid.
I love that.
There's like a picture of it and everything.
That's great. I wonder if it locks you in. I'm like...
Stuck forever. It's actually a true story.
That sounds amazing though.
Yeah, that was really
What's
fun.
What's it called again?
La Cabina. I think if you look up like the telephone box, it also comes up. But that just like, that filled me with a nice dose of dread.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
And then, before that, obviously, The Outwaters, Heart Eyes. I fucking love that movie. I was like, I don't want it explained.
That movie fucked me up.
I know. I'm just like, but like I was saying earlier, like the time being weird and like time acting as though you were like, you just dropped acid is
Yes.
I'm like, that's
Yeah.
horror to me. So that film falls into that category.
And that
Sure
movie
does.
definitely plays with time so much. Like,
Right.
what is happening kind of levels of time manipulation. Oh,
Love it.
gnarly.
Well, let's take a quick break, and then when we come back, we will dig into your pick, Sophia.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
New activation and upfront payment for 3-month plan required. Taxes and fees extra. Additional restrictions apply. See mintmobile.com for full terms.
It's easy to get lost in the latest true crime podcast or your favorite binge-worthy show. But what about your own story? That's the most important story of all, and therapy helps you write it. BetterHelp Therapy is 100% online and designed to be convenient and flexible enough to squeeze in between the next episode on your list. Get started today at betterhelp.com/pause for 10% off your first month.
And we're back! All right, Sophia, what film did you bring with you today for us to talk about?
I brought a miniseries because I'm built different. I brought 2002 Rose Red, which is a Stephen King direct to... Well, he wrote the screenplay. It's not an adaptation. It is a directly made Stephen King production.
Sure is. And in this miniseries, a group of people with psychic powers are invited to spend the night in a haunted house. We've all heard this story before.
Mm-hmm.
But,
we sure have.
Sophia, why is this your Scarred for Life pick? Tell us everything. When you first saw it, what terrified you about it? Like, tell us your Scarred for Life story.
I feel there's like so many films that I could have like picked for this that have like scarred me in different ways, but this one specifically hit on so many things that scar me and delight me about horror. Obviously, it's got the Shirley Jackson / Hell House / Winchester Mystery Mansion.
Yeah,
it's basically like the Venn diagram is a circle over those three elements.
Yeah, pretty much.
But I remember, so my mom was a big fan of Stephen King growing up. I had not read any Stephen King until I was probably in my early 20s.
Okay.
I had seen it at like way too young of an age. And basically following that, so I had seen it at a friend's house and I had been so scared. I was sleeping over at her house and I had been so scared that in the middle of the night, I woke up and I was like, I have to pee so bad. But I can't because he's going to come and get me out of the toilet. That I like had to wake up my friend and like have her stand guard outside of the door. And I'm like logically as an adult, you know that a clown is not going to come out of the toilet and grab you.
Hiya, Sophia.
Yeah, like, but in my 5-year-old mind, I was like, he's coming to get me. And so like off the back of that, we had gone. This was probably like within a couple of weeks or a couple of months, we had gone to Blockbuster, seen the VHS for Rose Red. It was one of those like double VHS whammies because it's this like 4-hour extravaganza that I have subjected you both to. I'm so sorry.
We'll get to that.
But yeah, so I'm sure that this happened with you as well, but like we couldn't watch it in one night, so it ended up just like dragging on.
I watched it all day Sunday.
Unhinged behavior.
That is unhinged, chaotic behavior.
It was a bad decision. But okay, like, so you watched it over the
yeah, it was like watched over the course of like it was watched over the course of like a couple of days. And just gave me the most nightmares ever. There's like so much going on in the series, obviously, but what really scared me was the anomalous architecture that is a subgenre that I love so much and like can talk endlessly about. I love spaces that are bigger on the inside than they are on the outside. I love spaces that are...
Are you Mary Beth? Because Mary Beth is the same way.
Let's
We
fucking
literally
go.
talk about that all the time.
It's like I had recurring nightmares as a kid about like houses having more rooms than they look, and houses being too big, and like never knowing the amount of rooms and things shifting. It's like it scares me so much, like the idea of these spaces like being so unpredictable. It's my favorite and also the most terrifying.
Yeah, I feel
And
like it
this movie
follows
definitely.
it follows like a dream logic where you're like you can't predict what's going to happen. There's like a scene in the film where they're doing a tour, which is like my favorite part of the movie and what I remembered so much about when I was a kid. I'm like, oh, there's actually a lot more going on in this film than what I had recalled from like the time that I'd watched it when I was a kid. But what had stuck out to me was this tour that they give, which is like a third of the movie is this like tour that they do basically, and like the history of the house.
Yeah.
But anyway, the head researcher is going through and she's like, oh, she's talking about a gymnasium and how the equipment is outdated, and then they get to a room and it's this mirror library where it's like a huge round library with like a mirrored floor, and they're like, oh, did you get mistaken, like should we look at the floor plans? And she was like, oh, the geography of this house is unpredictable because it changes, and like things like that, and like the Lost Woods in Zelda where it's just like stuff shifts. I'm like, I don't know. I'm still unpacking why that's interesting to me, but I'm so addicted to stories that have those genre elements in them.
That's why I love Skinamarink.
Yes, absolutely.
That's why I love that shit. Where you're just like don't really know where you are, and you feel like you're not connected to reality. And I think that's why I love haunted houses too, like haunted house stories. And this is obviously, aping off of a lot of haunted house stories. I think Stephen King said this is like the ultimate haunted, or he wanted to write the ultimate haunted house story. And we obviously see a lot of Hill House in this, and it should have been more interesting to me than it was. But
yeah, there's like this movie is very of its time in a lot of ways. It has some very problematic character portrayals that are very Stephen King-y.
Oh, it's just so it really is
Annie.
So Stephen King in some of these. It's just it's kind of sad how easy it is to identify his work by the stereotypes that man likes to really just use as much as possible.
Yeah, there's like the magical neurodivergent character and like the overbearing mother with like the wimpy like son, and there's always like sprinkle of fat phobia. Yeah.
But he's also a cretin too, like at the same time too. So like the fat nerd is like the creep who lives with his mom, of course, and is always eating ice cream.
It's got its it's a movie.
It made choices.
It did. I mean, like Annie's character. I mean, Annie, right? Annie Wheaton, and it's always like a young girl who has a doll she always holds on to, and she's nonverbal. But look, like there's at one point, does Julian Sands' character, Nick Hardaway, is that him? Is that Nick his name? I'm so sorry. I could not remember
He's such
any
a
of
bully
names.
in that movie. I'm like, I don't like this man at all.
But
he's
he's
like
at one
Still
point,
hot though.
he's so hot. He's like scary, creepy British hot. He's like, but he's like, she's above us all, like a princess. I'm like, God, like you couldn't have made this any more worse if you had tried. Like, we can't even communicate with her. She exists on another level, and it's like, oh my God. I know that this is 2002, but I thought we knew better in 2000. I thought that this was from like when I'm like, oh, this has to be from like the 90s. I'm like, no, 2002. Oh no. Oof. Anyway.
Yeah. Even that her sister's name, like her sister has a name, but they're like, anyway, we're just gonna call her sister. I was like, okay, that's what
like,
okay.
I was like, wait, because like she's introduced and like the father is calling her sister, and I was like, wait, are they brother and sister? Like, what is happening in this opening scene? Like, she's like, why are we calling her a sister? And then we have the neighbors across the street that are like, there's something wrong with that little girl, and I don't just mean that she's autistic. And I'm like, what is happening in this opening scene?
Yeah,
Like,
I don't know.
what?
I was watching there's like a whole behind the scenes making of, which is fascinating in a lot of
is.
ways. But what I found kept coming up that I thought was really funny was interviews with a bunch of like the cast and the director, and everyone being like, well, whatever Mr. King wants, Mr. King will get. And, you know, we could have edited it down, but it's his vision. So I'm like, no one was allowed to touch this.
I think that's the problem. Like, we'll get to that in a bit. Like, I have a lot of thoughts about that aspect of it. But okay, so going back to your story though, so it's the fact that the house is, you know, constantly changing, and I love that is one aspect of this. I really love the production design of this house is gorgeous. And from that, I love that mirror library thing, or the time they enter the room and it's like they're walking on the ceiling. Mm-hmm. And like everything is like the lights are on the ground sticking up and all the furniture is on the ceiling. So like cool. I love that aspect of it. Is that kind of what terrified you, or was there more to it than?
I think so. There was. This is like tangentially related. When I was maybe like 6 or 7, I went to. We have something called Laser Quest in Canada, which is like It's laser tag, which is just it's like paintballing but with infrared lasers. You're in like an indoor space. Everything is dark and very smoky, and it's labyrinthian, and everything is glow in the dark. And this was like the thing that everyone did whenever it was someone's birthday. Laser Quest.
Always laser tag.
We need to celebrate Laser Quest. And so I like prided myself so strongly on like how good I was for like being a 7-year-old at Laser Quest. And like the username that I would have was like 007 or something. I was like, yeah, I'm sniping bitches. But there was one time where I was in Laser Quest, and then they have like an alarm that sounds, and so it's like everyone go back to the hangar, and the hangar is like a garage. And so there's exit arrows, but everything is neon, and it's so dark in there, and it's so labyrinthian on purpose that I got confused. And by the time I made it back to the hangar, they had closed it, and so I was alone inside the Laser Quest, just in pitch darkness, except for glow in the dark, like spooky spray painted walls. And you're supposed to call like Marshall upstairs or Marshall downstairs if you get lost. And so I was just screaming, Marshall downstairs! And it felt like an eternity for like a 7-year-old. It was probably like 5 to 10 minutes, but apparently my brother was like, my sister never came out. They're still in there. Like, and so they had to come get me. And so I'm not like ever since that day, but it's definitely like a core memory where I'm like, anything that is labyrinthian or like plays with perspective really freaks me out and gives me like a sense of panic. So there's like that perspective hallway in this movie where the like doorways and arches get smaller and smaller like as you look down the hall, but they're actually getting smaller to make it look like the hallway is longer than it is. And the real doors are like hidden behind parts of the wall that you don't normally see.
Yeah.
And there's
that really cool zoom down the hallway where it's like all of a sudden boom, and I'm like, that is really cool. Like there is a lot of technical stuff in here that I think is really, really neat. For sure. That was something that really jumped out at me, that hallway where it almost like it just sort of immediately like elongates, and I was like, ooh, that is really cool.
Yeah. I love anything that's like, I feel like we don't take enough advantage of I'm like we as a genre community take enough advantage of like weird interiors. I'm like, yeah, nature's spooky, but like we spend so much time inside industrial spaces and like buildings that are sometimes they're old, sometimes they're modern, and I'm like, there's a whole part of this film where I guess like one of the characters inherited Rose Red, the mansion.
Yeah.
And he says at one point, he's like, this is the last weekend that we can go for the expedition because it's going to be torn down and replaced with condos because he needs the money. And I'm like, I would fucking love a sequel where they're building condos and it's like the condo starts building itself and just keeps adding rooms.
Evil Dead Rise 2 is actually a crossover. But
I'm like, I haven't seen Evil Dead Rises, but I heard that it takes place in a condo, and I'm like, God damn it! I hope they took advantage of that location because there's so much you could do with like freaky parking lot and just like
they do. They utilize it mostly.
I have thoughts about that. But that's a different podcast.
That would be such an incredible like sequel about gentrification and just like it starts just expanding and people like their people's apartments start merging. Like, oh, that would be so cool.
Right?
That would be so cool.
So I'm like, oh. Yeah, just the fact that there's this like beautiful building that is going to be completely demolished to make room for a condo unit of all things. You're like, ew, the housing crisis. You're like, this is extra. This is extra timely. And the fact that it's like right next to this super loud highway in the film.
The shots were like it's like this giant mansion and then highway. I'm like, it's so visually arresting. Just that design. It's like, wow, this is like right there on the cusp of civilization, but it feels miles away at the same time.
Yeah, I feel like they did it as like a nod to the Winchester Mystery House, which I think is pretty central. I don't know if it's in like Seattle. I'm like, California? Where's
I think it's in California.
It's California. But I think that they had considered filming there, and then
it's in California.
They had thought that it was too claustrophobic, so they're like, we want these sprawling spaces to feel enormous. And the Winchester Mystery House was just like, everything was so small, the doorways were really tiny, and they were like, this doesn't make sense for what we need. And then they were like, it's right next to a highway, and the ambient noise is just like terrible for filmmaking.
Yeah. So it sounds like they filmed in a couple different locations, but for some of it was actually within a soundstage. And this house, again, the production design is very stunning. I love it doesn't look like a made for TV miniseries from that time period. Like TV at that time period and TV now is very different. But at that time, it looked really expensive, and there's some really good effects in there, particularly like when they're in the garden, the solarium, is that what they call it? And that the statue starts to like move, like really cool, and takes off its face, and the eyes are looking like some really cool design work here. And it looks, I mean, ABC spent $35 million on this, and
crazy.
You can tell in the production of this. It's stunning to look at.
I
the
love
story's not the
the production
greatest.
design. Yeah, you're like, that's something else. I had also, I like deep dove after we like decided to do this episode on this miniseries, but I had found out that they had spent a bunch of money or like part of the budget on marketing, and they had seen that Blair Witch Project had created this like fake website for the release of the Blair Witch Project that had like touted that film as, instead of found footage, it was like, that's what found footage is. They're like, it's real. And so they had invested a bunch of the marketing money to make like a fake diary of Ellen Rimbauer, who's like the owner of Rose Red from like the early 1900s. And they're like, it was recovered at an estate sale, and like, here are the floor plans of the mansion, and like, here's her story. And it was they had just like hired a ghostwriter to write this.
They did, and people thought that it was Stephen King that wrote it, and it was some other, I can't remember what his name is. Ridley Pearson wrote the tie-in novel. But like, they also like, they did a prequel miniseries, The Diary of Ellen Rimbauer, as well. And there was like a whole bunch of, it's obvious, like before I even like knew that Blair Witch was an inspiration for it, it's obvious that they pulled from it, because there's a lot of things in here that they're trying to weave into nonfiction, which for Blair Witch really worked. Like, I was one of the people that got suckered in with the sci-fi documentary before the Blair Witch Project came out.
I love it.
And here I'm like, you're doing all of this, but it's obviously a movie. Like, I don't know. It's weird to me that they would go with that like nonfiction route when it's very obvious, like not the same thing as Blair Witch. But I mean, they spent $200,000 promotional marketing for this. Like, wild.
Yeah.
Wild.
It's so like movie exec to be like, oh, that worked, but you're like, but you didn't do the critical thinking about why it worked. Like you're just seeing the thing without like thinking about it in context, and that could always be a problem. And but I mean, look, apparently it worked. It had like, I mean, remember when people would watch things live on cable? It had incredible incredible ratings. Had apparently not great reviews, but I mean, like, this was an era when like people would watch it 3 nights in a row. Like, remember the miniseries when we would like? I loved watching those kinds of things. Like, it was always so exciting. And this is very much that time when like those kinds of like
event TV,
like 3-night events would be so popular. And if it was a Stephen King, like, written, original, of course.
Yeah. But that's also where I'm like, I don't understand why they would try to make it, like, a documentary or, like, it's based on, like, reality. Because I'm like, you have Stephen King's name on there. It's like, it's obviously a work of fiction.
I love this little note that I found because Beaumont University is where Joyce Reardon worked at in this show, and they had created a fake website, and it was bombarded with emails from friends who were convinced that Joyce Reardon and Rose Red were real. So like it did work apparently, but like I'm like, how gullible are people?
Media literacy has been dead for a long time, it seems.
Yeah. I'm like, there's some things where I'm like, it makes sense where I'm like, I wish I had seen it when I was younger, but I just saw Ghost Watchers like a year ago for the first time, and I'm like, fuck, this is brilliant. Like,
Ghost Watch.
Ghost Watch. So, I'm so sorry. Yeah. Ghost Watch.
It's so, and like, that's how you do a good haunted house movie too. I mean, oof.
And also just like found footage and like touting it as a real event. You're like,
a live recording. Yeah.
Lean into it.
So smart. But I think it's amazing that this miniseries even came to be, because it was originally, Stephen King wrote it back in, I think, 1996 as a feature movie, and went to Steven Spielberg to make a movie version of it. And they kind of disagreed on, Stephen King wanted to be more horror. Spielberg wanted to go more thriller, probably like PG-13 type, what we ended up getting is The Haunting in 1999 that like did that, focused more on the thrill ride aspect instead of the horror. But they parted ways. Stephen King bought back the rights, started writing it into a miniseries in 1999, and then got hit by the van.
Mm-hmm.
And this was like he called it to be therapeutic. This was like, writing this was like his therapy for it. There was a quote from the Los Angeles Times back in 2002 where he said that he was using the work as dope, basically, because it worked better than anything they were giving me to kill the pain. It was very difficult to push the pen 45 minutes a day, but it was vital to get back into work, because you have to break the ice somehow. You have to say, this is what I do. I'm either going to continue to work or I'm not. You say, if I can do this, maybe I can walk. If I can walk, maybe I can resume some kind of human intercourse. Work seemed to be like the logical place to start. So I do think that this feels like a writer that was trying to get back into it. And it was painful, because I think it's funny that I was watching this, and then I was looking, I was like, when did Scary Movie 2 come out? And Scary Movie 2 came out a year before. And it's funny to me, because Scary Movie 2 almost feels like a parody of this film in a lot of ways. And it came out before this movie came out. And I mean, you could say that about, like, because Scary Movie 2 is parodying a lot of, like, it parodied The Haunting. So obviously The Haunting from 1999 and this, very similar in some regards. Hill House, all that kind of stuff. It's obvious that there's like a crossover, that it doesn't have to be very in depth, but I'm watching this movie and I'm like, this is everything that Scary Movie 2 satirized a year before this came out. And I think that's really weird and really funny.
Yeah. I wonder when they started production on Rose Red, because there was like The Haunting in 1999. There was like House on Haunted Hill remake in 1999.
I get those mixed up all the time. I'm like, The Haunting and House on Haunted Hill are the same movie.
Yeah. And then there's like 13 Ghosts. There's like so many haunted house, like little iterations on haunted house that all came out within like the same time period. Yeah. I wonder how long this one was in production for. I mean, the production design's like insane. It's beautiful.
Really
that's
is.
That's what drew me to this movie, really. It's certainly not the plot.
No, when I started watching this on Sunday, I was really enthralled with the first part. I really enjoyed the first part where it's setting up everything, and there's a lot of exposition, but we're setting up all this kind of stuff. And I kind of enjoyed that. And I did remember Annie in her wardrobe with her, is it like a cap that she wears?
She's like a beret or something, yeah.
A beret, yeah. Because when I saw her, I was like, oh, okay. I think I did catch maybe this first part on television when it aired originally. Because I'm a huge Stephen King fan. I love his work. Even when he has problematic aspects of it, I grew up on him. It's a nostalgic thing. One of my favorite books is It, even though there are some hugely problematic stuff as we get further into that book. But it is still one of my favorite books. I love him. So I think I probably saw the very first part, or at least part of it, on television. Because when she looks at the camera and has her head kind of tilted in this kind of crooked smile on her face, I was like, that was like unlocked a memory for me.
Yes.
But I'm watching this first part. I'm like, okay, this is kind of interesting. And then we get to the second part. And I just, aside from a little bit of the tour aspect, I'm like, we're still giving exposition. We're still like talking about this past, and we're like doing it kind of poorly. Like we're just sort of like talking about it, and then there'll be like some past reenactment almost that is happening.
Literally, yeah.
And I'm just like, when are we going to get to the haunting stuff? And it takes forever. And I like the ending. I like the beginning, but that middle section, boy, on Sunday was that kind of a rough patch for me.
Well, it's just like it just feels like King's typical loving to do exposition. And like it works in a novel when you have that interiority of characters and you can kind of like go deeper into their psychology. And it's weird because like I usually like the characters that King, even if they're bad characters, like I can appreciate how much he writes that, like how much depth he tries to give them for the most part. And here I'm like, I don't even remember their names. Like I don't remember who any like, and it's just like it's like he was trying to write a novel for the script, but didn't really know how to write the script, and which is a bummer because like I think there is something really interesting here. I love the idea of this kind of, again, the house that's changing and a group of psychics. I mean, it's not necessarily original at all. Like, sorry, King, but like this is not that original. But it's like an interesting idea. And I think again, like the intro and like the lore and the end is really interesting, but it's just a lot of characters lounging around sipping coffee and like yelling at each other.
It was very long.
It was very long. Well, and Sophia, you said earlier, I can't remember exactly what you said, but it was like, but I found this quote, and this just reminded me because I'm trying to remember exactly how you phrased it, but there was like a quote from Stephen King where he found the miniseries format more conducive to his writing style because he's like, I'm a quote putter inner rather than a taker outer. That's what it was. And so it makes sense that he would say that because, as you said earlier, people were like, well, it's kind of his vision. We're not going to mess with it. Someone should have.
Right. Can we get an editor in here real quick?
Yeah.
Because he is a putter inner. He will put in a whole lot of stuff when it's not needed.
We need a no man.
Right. Exactly. He needed an editor. He needed to hire Sophia to edit this.
I know. Like, that's so annoying. You're like, oh, we just let him do whatever he wanted. It was fine. I'm like, God damn it. Like, why don't, like...
Realist man.
It's just, like, just such typical, like, privileged white guy behavior of just getting like, oh, yeah, we'll spend millions and millions of dollars on his project that we didn't really want to rein in or tell him how to fix it. It's like, Jesus Christ. I want that.
I feel like it's also just, like, a disservice to the work to not edit it because there's like something there, otherwise we wouldn't be talking about it, where it has all these like interesting elements and it's like a blend of all these other stories that or like points of reference that I really like. And there was like, you could tell that they put so much love into like the set design, and I read somewhere that there's like 200,000 square feet of set that they designed for this film, which is like,
I believe it,
an unfathomable amount.
It really
of
is
work.
That's crazy.
And then you're like, but then nobody was able to reel in the story a little bit and like cut a couple minutes here and there. We could have the director's cut. And
I am curious. I would love to see what his original script was that he was working on with this as a feature film. I would have loved to have seen a more manageable feature length presentation of this as opposed to a 3-night event. Because I do feel that even with some of the complaints I might have with it, I do feel there's a lot of padding in this to make it be a 3-part show. And maybe watching it like on a 3-night event, it wouldn't feel as bad because you also have commercials breaking it up. So like there's a little bit of like downtime as well, but like this was not meant to be binged. So listeners, if you're planning on watching this on YouTube or whatever, do not binge it like I did, please and thank you.
Yeah. I'm like, I just wish it had focused more on like that seed that's at the core of it that made it so interesting, which is like, to me, the house that is building upon itself, and when they go in there, it like reawakens. So like the fountains start up again, and then like the father clock starts, like the pendulum starts swaying again, and they can hear the construction that's happening. And I love this idea that it's like continually building, and even the element of like, I think it's kind of stupid a little bit, but then what I had written down somewhere, they were like, we need the men to build, gender roles, come back, Stevie, because there was one character, and it was like the son who had inherited the mansion. There was like a ghost that gives him a hammer at one point, and they're like, come and build. And it was just like, Rose Red likes to get men to build the house, and it likes women because it's sapphic. Because I think that it did have sapphic elements, whether they wanted to or not.
Rose Red is a lesbian, everybody.
Exactly. So yeah, I love that element of it, where it was just like, yeah, here's 2 like sapphic bitches that are just like going around having fun killing the men's. And I love that like Sukina, who is the Ellen Rimbauer's like partner slash like,
I'm pretty sure there was some queer coding there too. Like them pushing the husband out.
Are you kidding me? They're like holding hands together and like looking. I was like, oh yeah, I don't. That's like that's very much barely subtext. Like that is almost text. Like that's the gayest shit I've ever seen. Even though she like kind of kidnapped her to bring her back to the States, right? Some weird race politics going on there. But, you know, we all know that
that's another issue
that
Stephen King
has.
Stephen King.
The Stand.
Mr. King. Mr. King, please.
Mr. King, you really didn't have to make... Okay. All right, buddy. All right. All right. Sure.
That's what we're doing. They
are lesbians. I definitely was like, they're definitely like very, very goodbye Earling the situation and shoving him.
They're roommates.
They're just roommates. And they were roommates.
But yeah, I love how like when they were doing the tour again, they were explaining like, oh, it's not even an architect that designed the perspective hallway. It was Sukina, like her partner. Yeah. And I was like, I love that.
I just love that it's like 2 kind of like unhinged women just making a fucking weird house and being like, make the men do all the work. And I'm like, honestly, good for them.
You're like, go power, go girl boss, gatekeep.
Yeah, gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss. That is.
Well, I love that. Like it collects. It seems to collect women too, because there's like the actress from like the 1950s or whatever. It's like trapped in it. I'm like, yes, collect all this sapphic love. Like I love that angle for it, and I wish it had kind of leaned into that a bit more.
Yeah, that would mean Stephen King was a little bit more in tune.
Yes. Instead, we got a scene where they did a flashback to a man dressed as a cowboy hanging himself in front of children because he was gay.
The gay man. Yes.
And I was like,
oh, lordy.
You see, an editor, if we had hired an editor, maybe a sensitivity reader sometimes is a good thing.
Yeah, and I've talked about this before, but I have such a weird relationship with King and the way he writes and his introduction of queer characters, because it's never been the greatest for the most part. Aside from, like, I found it very affecting in the way that it tackled queerness. But, like, I remember the first time I was exposed to anything sexual and involving two men, and it was in the stand with this one, with the kid, I think his name was, in Trash Can Man, where the kid is basically shoving the gun up Trash Can Man's butt. And that is, like, as a sexual act. And that is, like, the first time that I think I had ever experienced anything to do with, like, same-sex situations. And for a little kid, like, I looking back and now I'm like, God, what a horrible, horrible representation of queerness, because it's villainized, and it's like turning something that is, you know, sexual in nature to something that is violent in nature, and it has, like, it's definitely sexual assault. Like, there's all that kind of stuff that kind of swirls around it. And I'm like, but at the same time, he was kind of my introduction to a lot of queer characters, but he's never handled it very well. I was on Chat Cemetery, a podcast that went through all of his work, and I was reading for that. It wasn't Mr. Mercedes; it was his second book, and I cannot remember the name of it off the top of my head now. But it was like he wrote. It was recent. It was, well, I mean, within like the aughts at some point. And in it, all the characters that were queer were either sexually assaulting people in jail, or was like a horrible person that was a pedophile. And I'm just like, he's still continuing to do that to this day. And so when I see stuff like this, I'm just like, oh, Stephen, why?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, that's definitely why I think, I don't want to like self-aggrandize, but that's why I think things like the Bury Your Gays anthology and like more queer voices need to exist and be more sort of prevalent in like the horror community and the world at large, because viewing queerness from the experience of queerness is going to be a more sort of like multifaceted.
Yep.
It's going to be seen through a more multifaceted lens, and like a more whole experience. So that if you do have a villainous character who happens to be queer, I think it's like taken on with more thoughtfulness.
Yes.
Than maybe just like playing it up.
Can I plug a book that is
absolutely
not rose red but haunted house but very queer?
Please.
This is Tell Me I'm Worthless by
Favorite
Alison Rumfitt.
It's so good. The last third of this
I'm not done with
this book.
I am not done. I'm like halfway through, but I started it yesterday. But it's very funny because I'm reading this and talking about it in another episode of this podcast, but I was reading it and I was like, wow, very fitting, very hot, like love the haunted house vibes. But this one, if you want a good haunted house and it's queer as shit, it is written by a trans woman. It is all about that stuff. So if you want like a good contemporary haunted house, this is the book, my friends.
Also,
you
just
want a
like
response to Rose Red.
not necessarily anomalous architecture, but I find that book also has really great elements of like, I guess this is like any haunted house, but like a house that is alive in the sense of it hungering and it like hunting and it hating, and like it's obviously like a metaphor for fascism and all of these different elements. But I love, she does such a great job with some of the scenes, just making it come alive in such a really spooky, unique way. I don't know. I love that book. I'm glad that you recommend it.
What I love about that is that it goes back, and I think it's even quoted in this, if I remember correctly, with Shirley Jackson's statement that like it might not be too fanciful to say that some houses are born bad. And I love that. Because that was, I believe that was in The Haunting of Hill House, was a direct quote from that I think this uses, this, if I remember correctly, the movie uses. But I love that idea of a house that is like hungering, or that is evil, that is just born bad. Like it's so cool.
Yeah, I think they talk about how the house like hates the warmth and humanity, and anything that makes something human, it like by nature hates. And I'm like, oh, I want to think about that some more, because I think that's so interesting to just look at architecture and like something that we create as a space to be inhabited and to live and to love and experience life in that turns against us. And it's like a lot of haunted houses are like a bad thing happens there, or a bad person brings some sort of negative energy in, or the like, and Rose Red is a culprit of this as well. It was on indigenous burial ground land,
yes,
which is, I think, a stupid trope that we need to just stop doing. But I love the idea separately of a house that's just like, it's evil because it's evil, okay? And like an evil that can't be explained, and you can't go to the library and like discover all the, like with the ring, like she fell down a well, and like if we like find the root cause of like what happened with this trauma, then we can solve it. I feel like I see like Terry in the background, you have like Uzumaki. What I love so much about like Junji Ito's work is just like so much of the horror is unexplained. It's like spooky thing happened and spooky thing can't be solved. Spooky thing's coming for you. Like,
yeah, it's like spooky things coming for you. It's random. It's like the core of cosmic horror to me. Like so often cosmic horror, you think of it as like tentacles and scary monsters, which it can be, which it obviously is. But like I also view things about like anomalous rooms and spaces as cosmic horror, because it is shifting our perception of reality and what it means, like how our ways of like interpreting reality and perceiving it are completely altered to the point that we kind of like lose it. And we see that in this movie. I mean, like, I think what this movie does do well is portraying how these characters are all kind of losing it in their own respective ways. And I think that's not uncommon in these kinds of haunted house movies, but I also think that's where haunted house movies get really interesting, if you can really dive in to what is so scary. And especially when it's a house like this that's like feeding off of people's energy, like what is so terrifying. And it's more than just like a spooky woman in a white gown. It's like so individual. And like and that to me is what makes these kinds of movies so fascinating, and how like they can really dig deep into our own like psychological perceptions and what happens when you fuck with our perception, especially when it feels so real.
I also love I love that you connected it to cosmic horror, because just the like cosmic horror in my mind is just like the vast indifference of the universe to like human suffering and human hope and human tragedy and all these different elements, where it's just like, you are nothing. You're a blip in like time space. It just, you don't matter, nothing in your life, and like everything that you're striving for, none of that matters. And that's just like, it's the most existential.
Well, and like that's what's also so interesting about houses to me, though, because like so often they're around for longer than people, and like they retain memory. I mean, like that's why people talk about haunted houses, they retain memory, and it's like they are kind of like weird. This is like getting very deep. We're talking about Rose Red, but they're almost like they're places of joy. But if you think about it too hard, like I am right now, they become these weird memorials of like past lives, and and like it is like houses can really hold on to things, and they become these weird like little monoliths to that. And it's like that's why haunted houses to me are so good, and I love when they're like kind of represented as carnivorous, because it does like what happens when you take on all of these memories and emotions, and like what happens if a house that's really interesting. Sorry, Terry, what were you gonna say?
No, I was just thinking, because I brought this up on the podcast before, but my parents own a Victorian house that was built in like the 1800s, and there are times where like you could get whiffs of something that someone was cooking and no one was cooking, and there's like it was this like, house is like
motherfucker just to say I've never had a ghost experience.
Casually drops.
Well, and I personally never smelled it, but my mom was always talking about, there's a smell that will come through the house and it smells like someone's cooking. And the house has a lot of history to it, obviously, for something that has been there for over 100 years. It used to be they had funerals in the room that my parents now watch TV in, where they had like the bodies established. Like it used to be a nursing home. So people have died in this house. Like it has, and you can sort of feel that history just oozing out of the walls, even if you don't believe in ghosts and stuff. There's a sense of place and a sense of finality in this home that has like a basement that is dirt, and I would not be surprised if there's bodies buried somewhere underneath the house. Like there's just that sense that a house can have, and I kind of wish that Rose Red had like leaned into that more, because there's also one of the things I love about King is the way that he kind of has like intertext and intertextuality between all of his books that are kind of set in a bigger universe.
Right.
And Rose Red is mentioned in his book Black House as a place where slippage occurs, where it's like there is like this other world, and sometimes it slips into our world. And that kind of ties into the cosmic horror aspect of it.
Yeah.
And so after the fact, he kind of attaches this as like sort of like a place where the other world kind of can slip into our world. And I appreciate that, but I just kind of wish that the actual film had a little bit more of that kind of playfulness, personally.
That reminds me.
And I'm also thinking like...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, please go.
Oh, I was going to go on like a tangent, so
no, please do.
Curious to... Let me look it up. There is one of the first like works of literature that I got into when I like started really, really getting into horror, like more contemporary horror, was called the Blumhouse Book of Nightmares.
Okay.
And so it's like Jason Blum had edited, I guess, like a series of short stories put together by different authors that were mostly filmmakers. So I want to say there's like works by Eli Roth.
Oh yeah, I'm seeing Ethan Hawke, Eli Roth, Scott Derrickson.
Yes. So
C.
there's
Robert
like
Cargill.
Yes, there's one by Scott Derrickson and C. Robert Cargill that just like has imprinted itself on my mind. Like brilliant short story. I want to say that it's called A Blank White Room, or like A Plain White Room.
A Clean White Room?
A Clean White Room. Thank you.
I'm at the Amazon page.
Thank you. I was like furiously looking and I couldn't find it. And it was like very loosely about this guy who is the manager of this. It's like a house or like a small apartment building. And what he has to do is he's like tasked with making sure that nobody leaves their room.
Oh.
And as the like short story kind of unfolds, it like moves back and forth between like present time and past of like these different residents that live there. But this isn't really a spoiler. You find out that he's a sin eater, and he has to make sure that this like sorry, that's my glass. This like house, this building is built on top of like a crack over hell. And so all of these sort of like evil spirits of people that have done horrible evil things when they were alive are like trying to creep out of hell to get back into the world. But the house is built like a labyrinth.
Oh.
And so only he knows how to get through. And so he doesn't even trust his eyes. He's like counting steps. Like, okay, it's like 6 steps forward and then 2 steps to the right. And then like 1 step forward and 1 step to the left. Because it shifts and it's supposed to confuse the spirits. And it's like about his experience like working there and like these spirits like getting out and him having to like retrap them. But what you were saying, Terry, reminded me of this story so much where I'm like, oh, I love the like seepage idea of like it's built over something and it's trying to contain something. And I just love the idea of like a labyrinth that confuses spirits.
That's amazing. That's
really
cool. A brilliant idea, actually.
I know. Really cool. I was like, it was my introduction to like C. Robert Cargill's work, and I was like, obviously like super prolific like writer and creator, but yeah, that story is just delightful and like so wonderfully written. I highly recommend.
I want to check out this book. I was looking at it on Amazon, and there's like a lot of good creators involved with this.
Yeah, what I liked about it as well was like I think most, if not all, of these are set in a city setting, which was kind of like the purpose of the book. I could be wrong, but so many of them are just like, it has to be set in this like sort of populated space. And so you get all of these different filmmakers and like writers take on, how do we fuck this up? Like, how do we make it fucked up rather? Like, so there's a lot of really interesting spooky stories in there that have like stayed in my memory.
Oh yeah.
Sweet.
I have a question. Have you ever read House of Leaves?
I am the biggest you will not find a bigger House of Leaves fan. So fun fact, when this was like maybe like 3 or 4 years ago at this point, I had reached out to Mark Z. Danilowski, who's like the author of House of Leaves. he has like a website called Anthology, which is they have like merch that's based on his writing. And I said, if you ever want to make a piece of jewelry, and he responded and he was interested. And so I have a little matchstick that's based on House of Leaves that we like co-created together.
Holy shit!
Wow.
I was just
That's
like,
so fucking cool.
it was such a highlight of my life. He was like so wonderful to get to talk to and so involved in the process of like, I was like sending sketches back and forth and we like perfected this piece like to a T. But yeah, it's based on House of Leaves.
That's amazing.
I feel like that was such a formative piece of writing in so many ways for just like the possibilities of what writing could look like, where there's like editorial interjections and again, like an anomalous house that's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. The man created the blueprint.
Right. I've been meaning to ask you this since you first mentioned that earlier tonight, because I was like, I wonder if you have to have read it, because that's why I needed to bring that up. Because I'm
a huge fan. When I was like 17, he released Only Revolutions, which was like one of the follow-up books after he had written House of Leaves, and I was like, Mom, we gotta drive down to New York City. I gotta meet this author. So she was so sweet, she indulged me and we like drove down to New York, and I have like one photo where I'm like, aww. And I had like hand bound him a little like leather book with like the letter Z on it that I had like shakily given him. I was like, I love your work, Mr. Danielewski. But yes, formative work.
Amazing.
I love that book to this day. It is just such an incredible like body of work.
That's so cool.
Yeah,
that's so cool.
Anything that has you put like a maze in there, or you like move stuff around inside and interior and make it do stuff that it's not supposed to do, I'm there. I'm like Relic, that scene in Relic.
Oh god, Relic. Yep.
I'm like, I lived for that. There's like that I don't know, like a 3 to 5 minute scene, and I'm like just inject it directly into my veins. I love that shit.
Yep. We're very similar. Very similar.
I'm so happy to hear this.
The moment you said that, I was like, oh my god.
Well, do we want to wrap up and give us our rating out of 5?
Yeah. That sounds good to me.
All right, Terry, you're up first. Terry, and how many Stephen King cameos out of 5 do you give Rose Red?
We didn't even talk about his rather
oh yeah, his weird
bad cameo.
Pizza delivery cameo.
He's had some fun ones, but I was like, this one isn't it.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I did not like this. I kept thinking, as I was watching, I kept thinking about how it's so wild to me that this was almost half the length of The Haunting of Hill House, which is another adaptation. Because, like, let's be honest, this is... Whether he wants to, I mean, he even admits it. He wanted to make like an adaptation of Ray Weiss's The Haunting from 1960, 1970. I can't remember exactly when that one came out. Somewhere in that time frame. And I'm watching this and I'm like, it's so weird to me to watch The Haunting of Hill House, a show that I find does what this wants to do, but in such a more interesting way, that I would much rather sit down and binge that than this 4-hour show ever again. I'm sorry. I was like, it drained me that day. And I'm like, man, I really wish that I had just split this over a few nights instead of watching all 4 hours in one stretch. Cause that was basically my Sunday.
Soldier.
But I there's a lot, like we've talked about, there's a lot of really interesting things in here that I just feel gets overshadowed by so much exposition, so much time spent around explaining the past, that I feel like if they had shown it, or if they had done like an episode or done like parts of episodes that were more telling the stories concurrently and then building to something would be more interesting. But I feel like there's a lot of telling and not enough kind of showing what is happening in here. And that just, for every like really good moment that is in this, it kind of takes me back. And I'm like, why did you go and make this when you made a perfectly excellent haunted hotel book? Like The Shining is so good. maybe just leave it with The Shining. Why? Why? This is 2 cameos for me, 2 Stephen King cameos. It was not for me, even though there were moments in here that I was like, this is fantastic. What about you, Mary Beth?
So I'm going to give this 3 because I love how it plays with space. Like, I think that was the big draw for me. Like, I couldn't tell you the names of some of these characters. The story
we have
was...
the old hot guy and the young hot guy. That was how I kept them straight. Because Gillian Sands,
we had old guy, hot old guy, young hot guy, and then we had older woman, hot older woman with the professor, and then the younger hot woman.
And Melanie Linsky.
And then Melanie Linsky, who just kind of exists, and then the autistic teenager who will solve all of our problems. Look, I love Stephen King, and I don't like Stephen King. I think he has a lot of weird tropes he relies on, but I do think he writes good characters. I think there was some good stuff here. I just think he writes better for a novel format. That being said, I love the use of space and what they're playing with space, and while it is very kind of like calling back to other things, you're always going to get me with a giant Gothic house that rooms change and things flip around and doors open and we have creepy Julian Sands who I'm like, is he like a figment of this house? Like, who is this man? Like, seems like he's a ghost too. Anyway, it's a good movie to have on in the background. I think if you're not like paying full attention and you're getting like the big parts, I think that is a better way. And that's why I think I enjoyed it, because I had it on while I was working, so I was watching it, but if it was like getting kind of slow, I could type up an email. Which I know is not the way we should be watching movies, but this is a 4-hour miniseries.
Oh, I kind of
as Christopher Nolan intended.
As Christopher Nolan intended. But Sophia, you have the final word. How many Stephen King cameos out of 5 do you give Rose Red?
I'm gonna put it right between the two of you guys, and I'm gonna say 2.5.
All right.
2.5 men, 2.5 Stephen King cameos. I like, it's basically everything that we've been discussing today, which is just, I think the 2.5 is like mostly for the incredible set design and creativity behind some of these spaces. And I kind of like some of the little like flashback stories, and getting to like get a little ghost tour, which is like kind of fun. The remaining 2.5 stars that aren't there is for like this is a slog, the third act just falls apart, there's some problematic moments and elements in here, this needs to be edited.
Yeah,
so
it's been a really good 1.5-hour movie.
Yeah, I'm like, there needs to be like a YouTube cut that someone makes. It's just the tour section.
It's the opposite of release the Snyder cut. Release the non-Stephen King cut. Oh my god.
Yeah, so I don't know. I like the nightmarish like element of like the swampy northwestern sort of like forest that's really sprawling outside of the house that they get lost in. Anywhere that like is big enough and like confusing enough that people get lost in. I love that kind of shit. Like, I'm with you, Mary Beth. I'm like, I love like the spooky anomalous stuff. So 2.5 stars for that, and that alone.
Hell yeah. One other thing that I forgot to mention, this is the second time we have had a miniseries written by Stephen King and directed by Craig R. Baxley, because the person that directed this also directed Storm of the Century.
Yes. I think that's
which
how
we've discussed on the show.
Because I think that was made before Rose Red,
Yeah, it was
right?
1999.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Also, very brief, funny story. I went to my local record store, which is a magical, weird place, and found a DVD copy of Rose Red. And I had never seen like a DVD copy of it, and I bought it because it was $4. Because every time I go to this fucking store, I find one of the movies that we're talking about.
That we've been talking
it's
about.
Weird. It's like a weird place that like always seems to have the movie that we're talking about. It's bizarre. So now I own Rose Red. Not because I like it, but because how could I not buy that when I find that?
$4. You can't really go
Didn't you
wrong.
also find Liquid Sky there that we talked about, like randomly?
No, that was a different place. Oh, that was a different place.
But I
found a lot of other. I found The Omen, the Steelbook of The Omen, like the day after we recorded an episode about The Omen. It was It was weird. Anyway.
Like they just know. Cosmic horror right there.
It's like they're watching the show.
Yeah. God, it's like the Truman Show. We're the Truman Show. Oh, God. Anyway.
Well, thank you so much, Sophia, for joining to talk about us. Where can our listeners find you if they want to? Because this episode will come out before your calls are done. Where can they send stuff to, and what do you have to plug that you want to throw out there for everyone?
Ooh, thank you for having me, first of all. I'm so excited that I got to talk to you folks and subject you to this 4-hour extravaganza with me.
Hey, it was worth it. It was worth it.
Now you can check it off as watched on Letterboxd and never have to revisit it again.
Did.
Done. But yes, I am mostly active on Twitter, and my handle is Sofia Ajram, which is just my first name, last name. For Bury Your Gaze, if you would like to submit, the submission call is on the Dread Central website. So if you search up Dread Central Bury Your Gaze, I'm sure it will be the first thing to pop up.
We'll include it in the show notes, listeners.
Yes, Thank you so much. And what else? I just released a novella with Crystal Lake Publishing about a clinical trial gone wrong. And there are 2 other novellas in there with Nadia Bulkin and Jess Landry. And they're all body horror novellas that are kind of like Clive Bark energy. And that is called Little Mutilations. And yes, there's more things to come, especially if you like architectural horror. That's the vibe that I'm building, but I can't talk about those things just yet.
Yeah.
We'll tease it.
So listeners, you've heard from us. We want to hear from you. What was your experience with Rose Red? Send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us directly on Twitter. I am at MB McAndrews.
And I'm at Gaily Dreadful.
And of course, don't forget to follow the podcast on Twitter at Scarred Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe. And if you want to help support us, we have a Patreon.
Thank you to Eric Power for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you everyone for listening. Please stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.
When you want to have fun and have scratchers to scratch, there's a playful way you can do just that. Scratch with the key or acrylic nail. Scratch with the quill from a porcupine tail. Use a belt buckle from your friend Lamar. Or scratch with your pick while you play guitar. You can scratch in a bunch of different playful ways. Scratchers from the California Lottery. A little play can make your day. Please play responsibly. Must be 18 years or older to purchase, play, or claim.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system. If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served. Hi, I'm Detective Dave. I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood. So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished. From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.